Hey guys, Gus here, and welcome to my review on the iconic role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. So, no other role-playing game attracts as much attention, and no other role-playing game is as popular, arguably, as Dungeons and Dragons. It's widely regarded as the very first role-playing game ever to be created, and it's still the most popular role-playing game today. So I only thought it was appropriate that this should be the first system that is reviewed. So, just quickly a bit of history then. Dungeons and Dragons was first released in 1974 and was written by a guy called Gary Gygax. Now, the rules actually came from a war game called Chainmail. So he wrote D&D, the original version, 1974. And since then it's gone through quite a few renditions. There's been Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and AD&D Second Ed is probably one of the most widely loved and widely played versions of the game. And they were all tactical studies rules. Now TSR was acquired by Wizards of the Coast in 1997. So this was in between AD&D Second Edition and Third Edition Dungeons and Dragons, which was released in 2000. So TSR was acquired by Wizards of the Coast, who are more widely known for things like Magic the Gathering, also Pokemon, card games, and things like that. So they acquired them in 1997, and then in 2000 they released D&D 3rd Edition, and then in 2003 it was D&D 3.5, and then the most recent rendition is 4th Edition, which was released in 2008. Now, all of the editions, barring the very first edition, so AD&D 2nd Edition, 3rd Edition, and 4th Ed, they've all got pros and cons. I mean, it's 6 and 2 threes really. I mean, a lot of people, again, I've addressed this in previous videos, a lot of people stick with the edition that they like the most. So a lot of people still stick with AD&D 2nd Edition. Now, I started playing 2nd Edition before 3rd Ed came out. And even though I started with 2nd Edition, I never really liked 2nd Edition. 3rd Edition came out, I bought that, and I played a heck of a lot of 3rd Edition and quite a lot of 3.5. 4th Edition I've only played twice, I think. I didn't really like 4th Edition. But the thing is with all the renditions of Dungeons and Dragons, they've got their strengths and their weaknesses. Like 2nd Edition I didn't particularly like, just because the thing is with D&D, there's a lot of abstract concepts. I mean, things like hit points. Hit points is a very abstract concept if you think about it. Things like armor class as well is a very abstract concept. And I don't know, 2nd Edition never really flipped my switch. I thought things were too abstract. Now a lot of people think, oh yeah, well, you know, 2nd Edition was a much more hardcore game in terms of it was more difficult for players. Yes, I agree with that sort of, because when you started off in AD&D 2nd Edition, it was more difficult to begin with. But by the time you got to higher levels, you were ridiculously powerful anyway. And that's the thing with Dungeons and Dragons, is that it's one of those games where it's a power game again. It is, whether you like to admit it or not. The rule system is designed to be a power game system. It's designed for like epic, medieval, high fantasy, lots of magic, people jumping around, flip-flapping off roofs, firing fucking 5 arrows a turn, cleaving people in twain with great swords, and having hundreds of hit points. And that's the kind of game Dungeons and Dragons is. That's just the way it is. And yes, you can alter it with different settings and by tweaking the rules, but at its core, that's what D&D is. From 2nd Edition onwards, and it's, even though it starts off more difficult than 2nd Ed. Now, the edition I'm going to be concentrating on today is 3.5. So, after being acquired by, after TSR was acquired by Wizards of the Coast in 97, 3rd Edition was released in 2000, and 3.5 in 2003. So 3.5 is just basically 3rd Edition ironed out. A lot of people had dramas with 3rd Edition in terms of it not being particularly balanced, etc, etc, but 2nd Edition is not balanced. The most balanced by far is 4th Edition. The problem with that though is it makes it very linear and it makes it very plain, if that's the way to put it. All classes are like the same. It's just very linear, it's very streamlined, and I don't really like 4th Edition. So 3.5 is actually my favourite edition. Horses for courses, right? So 3rd Edition then is, it's based on something called the D20 system. So D20, 20-sided dice, and everything is based on D20 rolls, so rolling your 20-sided dice for just about everything except for combat damage. So all your skill checks is rolling 20-sided dice, all of your attack rolls is rolling 20-sided dice, and it's always trying to achieve a difficulty. So you set a difficulty for a task, so a DC, difficulty class, so like a DC 15 would be average. So you roll a 20-sided dice, add your skill, and you try and hit or exceed the target number. Quite simple. And yeah, and that's basically how the system is based. Now, with 3rd edition, I wouldn't be right in not mentioning the open game license. Now, when Wizards of the Coast released 3rd edition, they had the game under open game license, which pretty much meant that you could produce, as long as you credited Wizards of the Coast, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but as far as I'm aware, as long as you credited Wizards of the Coast in your books, you could basically publish supplements and just about anything you wanted for D&D, and this led to an inordinate amount of supplements that came out for 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. Now this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because in one way you got some really good supplements, like you could just throw supplements out there, get them published, and they'd be in like gaming shops, you could buy them. They weren't just like on the internet, you could like get proper printed books, it was great. But as you can imagine, the other side of the coin is that there was some real shit produced. Like some of the stuff you're just like, this is fucking bad. So it was a real double-edged sword, good in some ways, and the problem was there was so many friggin' supplements released, because you could release, anybody could write them and release them, right? There was just a huge amount. So like really, there was a lot for 2nd edition, but there's a lot, like way more for 3rd. So you have to like sift through all this stuff to try and find, the gems, essentially. So a good and a bad thing, alright? But suffice to say, there was a heck of a lot of supplements and extra stuff for the core Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition or 3.5 rule set. So that's the way the game worked, right? Now, in D&D 3rd and 3.5, you've got 3 core rule books. I've got them here. You've got the Player's Handbook, okay, which, I've got these collector's editions, which are quite nice and nifty. So you've got the Player's Handbook, you've got the Dungeon Master's Guide, okay, and you've also got the Monster Manual. Now, what it says on the tin, right? So Player's Handbook is the book that, look, you don't have to, not everybody has to own the Player's Handbook, right? You don't really need to, but the Dungeon Master is really the guy that should have all 3 books, right? So anyway, so the Player's Handbook is perfect for players, exactly what it says on the tin. So it's got your character sheets in here, it's got what is role-playing, right? It describes what role-playing is, so if you're completely new to role-playing, you pick the book up and it goes through everything with you. How to create your characters, all the different races, all the different classes, the different weapons tables, spells, divine spells, arcane spells, it's got your character sheets in here, it's got all your feats, because you can add feats to your characters to make them do like extra stuff, all your skills, combat, how combat works, so it's like the core rules of the game. If you're not going to buy any other book, this is the book to get, and it's really good value for money, you get a lot in here. Now, yeah, so that's the Player's Handbook. A Dungeon Master's Guide, again, perfect for Dungeon Masters. It's got magical items in here. It's got basically top tips for running adventures if you want to be a Dungeon Master. So it's a really good book to read through. It's got like how to plan out adventures. It's got non-player characters, how to create them, how to balance them, difficulty levels, how to run campaigns, structuring your campaigns. Yeah, it's got extra character classes in here as well. So like when you're going up in levels in the game, because obviously you earn experience, like most computer role-playing games. When you kill stuff, you earn experience, or you complete quests, you earn experience, and your character goes up levels and gets more powerful. And you can actually split the levels off. So if you start off as like a fighter, you can split off and do like a specialist class. And they've got those in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Like I said, magical items. You've got loads of magical items in here. All the values of the magical items. Yeah, and it's just a very good book. I really enjoy the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then they go on and they've got the Monster Manual. Now, Monster Manual, again, what it says on the tin, it's basically a book filled with monsters and encounters for your group, your players, to put into your campaigns. Now, it's got some interesting stuff in the start, in that where you should add them in, difficulty class, modifiers for experience, all that sort of stuff. Now, the thing with Dungeons and Dragons is I both love and like and dislike the system, in that it's the first role-playing game that I played, and it's the first role-playing game that a lot of people play, so it's got a special place in most people's hearts, especially AD&D 2nd edition. A lot of people really love 2nd Ed, and I can see why, and I love 3rd Ed. Now, the thing with D&D is that, do I think that it's the best role-playing system? No, I don't. And that's because there's a lot of, as I said before, there's too many abstract concepts. And for new players, yes, the Player's Handbook is really good at getting you into the game, But I found that even if you're new to role-playing and you read through the player's handbook, you still, like, if you've never gamed and you've never role-played in your life, you're a complete newbie to gaming, and you read the player's handbook, they still don't really understand it because it's a lot of very abstract concepts. Again, like hit points and armor class, it's like, it doesn't, when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it makes no sense. Because it's essentially, and that, as much as it galls me to say it, D&D is a power gamer's game. It's designed to get your character to silly levels, killing loads of monsters, wiping out cities, and it's just like, you can get insanely powerful in all the editions of D&D, bar first probably. So it's got a lot of abstract concepts. So really, to learn the game, you need to get, you need to speak to people, you need to find a role-playing group, or start role-playing with your buddies, and look at lots of tutorials online and stuff on how to do it, because it's very abstract. Whereas with a system like RuneQuest, which I'll review in a different video, it's a lot more intuitive. The things make sense because it's based on a D100 system, skills 1 to 100, roll percentile dice. It makes sense. You can visualize it, and it's not a lot of abstraction like there is in Dungeons and Dragons. That said, D&D is still the most popular system, so it's a lot easier to find a group. And the thing with D&D is, although it's a generic fantasy role-playing game. So what that means is no specific setting. So it's not set like Star Wars is set in the Star Wars universe, right? What is it called? Dark Heresy, I think, is the Warhammer 40,000 one, which is set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. There you go. But D&D is not. Doesn't have a specific setting. There are very famous settings like Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk, which I don't like. I fucking hate Forgotten Realms. Anyway. That they have settings pre-built, okay, and the world is completely fleshed out for you to play in, and they've also got lots of, you could buy modules. So if you're a dungeon master and you don't have a lot of time to create your own stuff, you can buy modules, and they basically, you read through it and you can play through modules and even campaigns with your players. And that's the thing with D&D, that's what's good, because there's lots of support for it, there's lots of pre-made stuff. Now, one of my favorite settings was actually called Dark Sun, which was like basically a fantasy post-apocalyptic setting, which is really, really cool. But they didn't release it for 3rd ed. They had it. There's an online site that you can look at, and that was one of my favourite settings. And they had it for 2nd edition. It was like big in 2nd edition, really brutal, really hardcore. But anyway, so you get lots of different settings that are pre-published. So you get lots of different campaigns and modules that you can play through. So there's a lot of support for it. So that's the other thing with D&D, and that's one of the other very good things. Because it's so popular, there's lots of support. And yeah, so I mean, my overall thoughts on the game is that, again, it's down to personal preference. I mean, it's not the best system, but I still like it. I still really like D&D. Now, I'll go a bit more in depth into the player's handbook. So, what it goes through in the player's handbook then is, obviously it introduces you to role-playing. It goes through your abilities. Now in the game you've got a character sheet, and I'll actually show you the character sheet, because when you look at this it makes a lot more sense. So on the character sheet, as you can see here, this is what your basic character sheet looks like. Alright, I don't know if you can make it out there yet. That's fine. So on there you've got all of your abilities, okay, you've got your saving throws, on the other side you've got all your skills lists, and then where my pinky is here, you've got all your weapons and the modifiers to hit and what have you, and then you've got the rear sheet, and this is basically like spells lists, adventure notes, and that sort of thing, like how much gold you've got, equipment, etc, etc. So in the game you've got a number of abilities. You've got strength, toughness, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So that's like your core stats of your character. Okay, you've got hit points, which goes without saying, that's how many hits you can take. How fast your character moves, okay, so speed. You've got armor class, which is like how hard it is to hit in combat, and your armor class takes into account like your dexterity modifier, so how agile you are, takes into account the armor that you're wearing, and other modifiers as well. You've got your initiative modifier, so that's the order in which you fight combat. Your saving throws, fortitude, reflexes, and will. So when things like if you've got certain spells will require you to make certain saves or take damage. You've got your base attack bonus, spell resistance, grappling. So when you're fighting in hand-to-hand combat, all your weapons and your attacks, and your entire skills list. Now, that's probably the best way to learn the game, really, is just to look at the character sheet and then go from there. But again, yes, it's all broken down for you, but a lot of the things are abstract. Now, so you've got all of those, and then in the actual book it breaks down into all the core races in Dungeons and Dragons. So you've got like humans, halflings, gnomes, half-orcs, dwarves, half-elves, and elves, and you can play any one of these in a campaign setting. and you've also got, so you choose your race and then you choose your class. And now the classes, you've got things like your barbarians, fighters, rangers, thieves or rogues they're called in this one, clerics, which are like healers, druids, nature magicians essentially, monks, hand-to-hand fighters, right? Yeah, and you got, I think you got paladins, yeah, you got paladins, wizards and sorcerers. So yeah, you choose a race, choose a class, you roll up your statistics, so your main ability, strength, toughness, etc. You choose your race, choose your class, and those will modify, your race will modify your base abilities, and then your class will have your, like what skills you get, like your advancement tree when you go up in levels. You've got a whole chapter on all your different skills, your different feats, which are like, your feats are like special abilities, imagine them like special abilities. And different classes get more feats than others. So for example, the fighters generally get more bonus feats every so many levels than other classes. Then you've got like your description, so you've got like alignment. So if you've heard of role-playing, especially Dungeons and Dragons, you probably would have heard of alignment. So you get things like lawful evil, neutral evil, if you want to be like lawful good or chaotic good, and you've got like different deities aligned to those. You've got all your equipment, so adventuring equipment and weapons in here, and it gives you all the tables for like how much damage you do, certain weapons at reach, and you've got like critical hit modifiers. And they've got a whole section on combat, which is great. It explains everything about combat. Combat's, it's okay in 3rd ed, it's fine, it works. They've got a little chapter on adventuring. Basically it's like how to be a good player, right? You've got a whole chapter on magic, how to use magic in the game. You've got spells, what spells you can cast, different classes can cast different spells. Even rangers can cast spells, odd. Yeah, and there we go. So that's basically the breakdown of the Player's Handbook, which is the main book in the game, and in my opinion, the most important book in the game. So it's really worth getting, and it's really worth checking out. I mean, it's a hefty tournament. You're getting your money's worth. You know what I mean? So it is good. It's D&D is a good game. Not the best, I would say, but it's a good game. And it's, like I said, it's great to get started because there's so much support for it. Now, the thing with D&D is, as I mentioned before, it's an open world game, so there's no specific setting, even though there are pre-designed settings. So the whole thing with it is it gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, it even says in the rulebook that the rulebook's just a guide, all right? So you're free to like modify things. So a lot of wargamers tend to, I mean, obviously you stick to the rules like 100%, right? With role playing, you can modify stuff. Like feel free to do whatever you want. If you don't like how powerful magic is, you can make it more difficult to get spells. If you don't, you can modify whatever you want. And that's the thing with role playing, and that's what I really like about role playing, is that you can create your own campaign setting, your own worlds, your own adventures, and then you can modify and make house rules, they call them, in that world. Now, so in that way, these 3 core books of Dungeons and Dragons really act as a framework from which to plan your adventures and work from. Now, initially when you first start role-playing, you'd start off and you just stick to the rules as they are. And then from there, as you get more experience, you'd start, branching out and creating house rules and what have you. So anyway, that's a quick rundown of Dungeons and Dragons, what I think of it, the 3 core rulebooks. And yeah, so look forward to my next video in which I'll review the Ruin Quest system, which I really like. And I hope you enjoyed these videos, or this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and take care.